So we've been teaching about the fact that we're a three-part being. Each part of us wants to be in control of our life. Our flesh has its own voice, has its own desire, it has a mind of its own, and it wants control of you. It wants to run your life. And it wants to be the one to decide everything. And it wants your will. Without having your will, your mind, your emotions, and your actual will, it can't really express itself the way it wants to. Your spirit, on the other hand, is born again. Your spirit is in touch with God. And your spirit was designed by God to be in charge of your life. And someone has to be in charge. Someone has to say no. Someone has to say, this is what we're going to do. And so your spirit can only function to the limit that it can use your mind, your will, and your emotions. So there's a battle for your will. It happens in your soul. There's a war in your soul. That's why when you have to make a decision, a major decision comes along, there's such an emotional tug of war. Do I do this? Do I do that? In part because your flesh is making suggestions and saying, why don't you do this? And you realize, well, that's not a good motive. That's not me. That's not how I think. That's not how I feel. And yet, where's that coming from? Where's that idea coming from? And it puts a lot of pressure. That's why when you're having to make a big decision, it's helpful to involve someone outside of yourself who's not in that tug of war, who's not in that big conflict that's going on inside of you, and they can help you sort out what's going on and who's saying what in part, because it's something you have to discern. It's not always easy to figure you out and to figure out why you tick, why you are the way you are. Your flesh is very, very subtle and very clever, and has a real strong ambition to do what it wants to do, and it doesn't give up very easy. There's a fight, there's a war. One time I was resting in. It was a Sabbath day for me. Monday morning's my Sabbath. And as I woke up and I'm laying there and I'm beginning to worship the Lord and pray and talk over with Him, I realized someone had said something at church the day before that hurt me. A criticism or something. I can't remember what it was now. But they said something that jarred me and hurt me, and it came to my mind first thing the next morning. And so because I wanted to cultivate an open relationship with the Lord, I decided to talk to Him about that hurt. And so as I laid there, I said, Lord, I'm hurting. And I wasn't expecting Him to say this. This is how one way you know it's God speaking. You know, when we're thinking, there's one thought leads to another thought leads to another thought. To have a thought completely outside that you would normally not have thought, you have to take note of that. It's very likely it's the Lord, or very likely it's your spirit that's speaking. The voice of your spirit is called conscience, and your conscience speaks. So I said, Lord, I'm hurting. I don't know what I was expecting. If I was expecting Him to say, oh, you poor boy, and kiss me on the forehead or make me feel better, or say, oh, what a good Christian you are for taking that persecution and not fighting back. Or I'm not sure what. I just wanted to involve Him in what I was going through. And so I said, Lord, I'm hurting. And so when He spoke to me, it completely shocked me. He said, which part of you is hurting? Well, it stopped me in my tracks. I thought, which part of me is hurting? And I realized I woke up that morning with a song in my heart. In other words, when I woke up, my heart was already singing. I said, well, I woke up this morning with a song in my heart, so my spirit's in good shape. And sticks and stones, really didn't break any bones. Physically, I'm fine. And I thought, which part of me is hurting? And I looked inside me, and I saw my old man, my old carnal nature, and he was all miffed, and he was angry, and he wanted to embarrass that person back, and he wanted to get even with them. And I saw him all wounded and pouting and angry, and I said, that's you, it's you, my flesh. That's the part that's hurt. I said, die, you beggar, die. And I was able to get up and go on, no counseling, no more thought about it, because the part that was hurt within me was the part that is always hurt. He's always getting his feelings hurt. He's always wanting to be consoled and wanting to be thought well of, and he has pride. And so there's no cure for him. There's nothing that I can do to help him. All I can do is deny him, which is a kind of, puts him to death. You can always tell your flesh, because your flesh is only selfish, entirely selfish. He's incapable. Even when he wants to give, it's because he wants to get. He wants to get applause. He wants to get credit. So even when he wants to be spiritual sometimes. So he'll say, I'll prophesy. Yeah, I don't really want to prophesy because, it's a lot to get me out there, but I'll prophesy, but I want everyone to think I'm super spiritual. So I'll prophesy this big yay, big word, and get applause. And so he's very, very clever. In fact, there's a time, this is hard to believe, there's a time during the Reformation when they were taking people on wagons, they were capturing Christians and taking them to the nearest city and setting them on fire in the marketplace. I've been to places where they've burned people alive. And there were Christians who were being captured, and then the guards would let them go, and they would say, no, you got to take me to the city, and I want to be burned at the stake. And the guards said, no, go, this is your chance to escape. But there was so much accolades and honor put on martyrs that they wanted to be a martyr. Isn't that amazing that they're willing to be burned so that they get applause and get their name on a plaque and everyone would sing their praises long after they're gone? You say, well, that's crazy. Well, our flesh is a little nutsoid. But Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 13, he says, why give yourself to be burned out of a wrong motivation? You're not doing it out of love. The opposite of love is selfishness, not hate. It's selfishness. And so he's writing and saying it's absolutely in vain for you to give yourself to be burned at the stake, yet you're not doing it out of right motive. He said at the end, you have nothing to show for it. You get nothing. In other words, when you stand before Jesus, your bad motives, your selfish motives are revealed, and you get no reward, even though you died and you gave your body to be burned at the stake. You get no reward for it. Isn't that wild? I mean, a total waste. You don't even get credit in heaven for it. So Paul's writing about it because it's something that actually happened. This whole thing of our flesh, we have to understand it. We have to be able to understand when it's speaking, when its desires are being expressed. The desire of your flesh is called lust. And the definition of lust is an unlawful desire, something that's contrary to what God wants for us. And so there's just everyday life, like this battle happens every day, all the time. For example, say you have an option to meet someone of the opposite sex, and everybody wants to be married. Everyone thinks that being married is going to solve all of their problems. Not realizing that Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he said, okay, it's not a bad thing if you get married, but I'll tell you this, if you decide to get married, you will have trouble in the flesh. 1 Corinthians 7:32, you will have trouble in the flesh. In other words, their carnal nature and your carnal nature, in the beginning you're so over the moon in love and everything is wonderful and the most beautiful person you've ever met, and you love them completely, they love you completely. And then Once that begins to shake out a bit, the next thing you know, their flesh comes to the foreground saying, I want you to do this, or I want you to do that, or I'm not doing that. And it's their flesh speaking, not just trying to run their own life, but trying to run your life. And he says, get off my back, quit telling me what to do, quit bossing me around. And her flesh doesn't like to hear that, and so she gets all riled up, and next thing you know, Paul says you shall have trouble in the flesh. Her flesh and your flesh are in an all open war. You're in a war. You say, well, then it'd be better if you didn't get married. Well, actually, singleness is the ideal. And people resent it. People say, well, I want to be married. But being singles, Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he said, if you're single, he says, don't even make all the biggest goal in your life is to get married. Use your singleness to serve the Lord. He said, that's the highest goal. Crazy thing is there's no marriage in heaven. None of us will be married in heaven. And there are people who give up their eternal life and give up their life in heaven to be married to someone down here, thinking it would solve all of their problems, not realizing it creates a whole other set of problems. So we've idealized something. But let's go back to the dating scene. Anyone interested in talking dating for a little bit? Is that a minefield or what? You meet somebody, and your flesh says, man, they will make you look really good. All your friends will go ooh and ah over this. This will be all over Facebook. This will be all over social media, and he's the guy for you. And your flesh is just really going crazy, and he loves me, and oh boy, you know. And then all of a sudden, you're not expecting this, but there's a still small voice, a quiet voice inside you. It says, yeah, but they don't love God the way you love God. And you're not expecting that. And you say, but they love me so much that they will eventually love everything I love. And I'll help them love God. In fact, he's gonna be my first convert. It's called missionary dating. And that's that small voice. Now, it's not even Jesus at this point in time. It's your conscience. The first means that God uses to change us or to challenge us is within our own conscience. If you need the Holy Ghost to speak to you, you're in big trouble, because that means you're ignoring your conscience. And so it's not the Lord. It can be, I don't want to rule that out, but often the very first part of you that speaks at all is your flesh. Usually he's front and center, he's right out there, he's loud, he wants to be number one, he wants to drive, and your flesh gets right out there. Your spirit kind of hangs back, and it's just that calm voice that says, here's the right thing. And so the calm voice says, well, he doesn't really love God. Not like you. No, he's not going where you're going. He's not interested in the things you're interested in. And you say, but I'll convert him. I'll get him there. He'll be so on fire before long. And your still small voice, your conscience will say, you ought to talk to somebody about this. You ought to let someone who's not in love in on this, and let them help decide whether you go any further. And you say, well, I can't risk that. They may say no. In fact, they will say no. So I'm going to keep this a little secret for a little longer, because my friends are going to say no to this. And so and your flesh is very, very crafty, and he'll figure out a way to navigate this whole thing. And your spirit will say things like, this guy doesn't have a job, and he's a vacant lot. He's not going anywhere. He's not doing anything. There's nothing being built in his life. You say, but when I get done with him, he will. He'll be doing all these things. Your flesh will say, your spirit will say things like, is this the kind of person you want your children to be like? And it stops you cold in your tracks, because you know that's not what I want for a dad for my kids. but he bought me flowers. He said really nice things about me, and he's really, really handsome. And so your flesh can justify and can figure out ways to get around it and get you to do things in secret because he doesn't want anyone. Anytime you don't want people to know, it's because your flesh wants its own way. And it can be the same kind of thing about buying a car. It's time to buy a car, and your flesh says, get that sharp little red one that everyone will think, ooh and ah, and that, boy, that is the coolest car, and that car is going to look so good. That car accessorizes it. It actually fits that purse you've got and those shoes you've got. I know most of you don't think this way, but it's amazing how many people do. And your flesh will want to buy a car out of its own desires, and your spirit will say, you can't afford a car like that. You can't afford a car like that. And you have this tug of war. It doesn't matter whether it's buying a meal, or it doesn't matter whether it's going for a walk. It doesn't matter whether it's a purchase or how you're going to spend your afternoon, how you're going to spend your evening. That war goes off in your soul, and it's exhausting. I mean, I think when people die and they find peace, the reason they find peace is all of a sudden the war is over with. The flesh isn't all over them, dominating, trying to get them to do what it wants them to do. And I wish there was a way I could tell you that the whole war thing can actually be resolved once and for all, and you can have peace within inside of you. It doesn't quite work that way, but I'll tell you, the more you feed your spirit and you say yes to your spirit, your flesh gets quieter and quieter and is not as assertive, because he's been put in his place so frequently that you do have a measure of peace, and you can feel like you're in control of your life. And that's worthwhile having. A whole patch of that is worthwhile having that. But there's a constant war in our soul.